Hello, and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we're going to be reviewing Malcolm and Marie, which is directed by Sam Levinson. It stars Zendaya and John David Washington. So Malcolm and Marie is about this couple that comes home from a movie premiere in which the character played by John David Washington, Malcolm, was the director of. And this couple goes into a series of fights and arguments. And that's pretty much what the movie is about. So, Jeffrey, what did you think of Malcolm and Marie?
So I guess that similar to the way this couple loves each other and hates each other is the way I feel from like scene to scene in this movie. And actually, it's a little unfair. I don't hate any of it. I see a lot of its ambition. I think there's a lot of great stuff going on here. There's times where it's really spellbinding. And there's a lot of times that I thought it was just crushed under the weight of its ambition, that its self-consciousness became self-indulgent. We should say that Sam Levinson is most famous for the show Euphoria. So he created that show. He's the showrunner. He writes every episode and he directs the bulk of the episodes. And that show has a very similar problem, I think, to this film, where the execution is extraordinary, but the writing is sometimes a little lackluster. But interestingly enough, I think that this film is almost compensating for the simplicity of Euphoria's writing. Like, Euphoria's writing is very surface level, and this film is like overcomplicating everything to such this extraordinary degree that's unnecessary. So it's just amazing that the same person wrote this, but maybe, you know, a person that's so self-conscious about how movie critics are going to view this movie is somebody that's thinking that hard about it, that says, you know, people say the writing on Euphoria is a little too simple. Well, I'll show them.
This film, I think, is as much as having a conversation with the audience as having a conversation with itself. I think there's a lot here to unpack. I'm not sure I really have done all the unpacking that needs to be done in this film because there's just so much dialogue. I mean, this film is literally a conversation between a couple, and the dialogue doesn't really cease to stop. I mean, it does in particular moments, and this is one of the things I really enjoyed about the film, is the way that it was outlined, and it's basically kind of built into chapters.
Yeah.
So I noticed that you would kind of have this confrontation or this kind of like making up, and in between each there would be like a little musical interlude.
Yeah, like a little jazzy interlude, yeah.
This film just so phenomenally transitions between all these scenes, and that's one of the things I really enjoyed about it.
This is almost like two films. This is one film that's like this self-conscious film about film. And then there's this other film that like wants to be before midnight. And it never really reconciles the two. And I think actually the film part of it is the more intelligent part of it, and the relationship part is the more emotional part of it. So I just feel very all over the place as a viewer. And I could never quite reconcile those things.
Completely agree with you. I think the film is completely overwritten. It feels very convoluted at times. Like there's so much going on, and
You're compartmentalizing your solipsism and it's belying our relationship. Yeah, like who talks like this?
But at the same time, I don't know what it is. I was so engaged with this, and I was holding on to every sentence. When John David Washington goes into this big monologue about criticism, film criticism, and he's just yelling like outside the doorway.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is over the top, this is way overblown. But at the same time, I was just so engaged with it. I loved it so much. And I think what it captured so beautifully is the thoughts that happen in our head. And I don't know if this is because I tend to think about things a lot. Like when I have thoughts, they tend to race through my head. And so I just found this to be a visual representation of my own brain. And I think maybe that's why I connected with it so well.
I see what you mean.
Not that I really connect with this character much beyond that.
I agree with you because I found myself almost feeling like I was being tricked. Like I felt myself emotionally engaged, but my brain was saying, there's a lot of things about this that kind of bother me. But you're right, I was hanging on every word. I will say, though, these may be my two favorite performances in a really long time. And I think that I like them more because they're elevating material that I'm not that enthusiastic about. Like when I read this, if I read this script, I think it would really aggravate me. But seeing them perform it, they're electric. And I think that elevating material like that is just, it's unbelievable on the part of these two actors. They are the reason that any of this movie works at all.
Yeah. Oh no, totally. Zendaya is a national treasure here. Like
She's very good in everything.
There is no debate here. If you have an opinion that Zendaya is not good in this movie, you are wrong. There is no arguing it. About her character in particular, I found it to be so much more dynamic and like multi-dimensional than Malcolm. So I think that was a little difference between the two in terms of the characters and how they were written. I felt Malcolm was kind of just a little bit more one-dimensional, just very egotistical, and he did at times, I think, branch past that, but I feel like kept reverting to that kind of stereotype. This film brings out moments, like at times I'm like, this is the most toxic relationship ever. But then I'm like, this relationship works because these two know each other so well. Like nobody knows them better than they know each other. And that's what kind of love is in a sense. So I find myself so conflicted with it, just on like a side note of like the relationship and whether it's working or not. I'm not sure I made up my mind with this because it's so toxic, but at the same time, it's just, there's so much love going on there and like understanding between the two.
There's a scene where, it's not spoilery, but say Zendaya grabs a knife. That's an extraordinary scene.
Oh my gosh.
So you watch a scene like that, and you're like, oh, that's the best 3 minutes of film I've seen in a year. And then there's all this stuff surrounding it that you say, I actually want to get to some things we were talking about characters. I don't love, this goes back to the writing, but I don't love the way that this film writes its characters because it tends to be the opposite character just talking about the other character's psychology in these long monologues and saying, these are all the things about you, and you're tripping over your own ego when you do all these things. And I really wish that the movie showed me that more than it told me. That whole long monologue, especially about Malcolm towards the end, it just didn't really land for me. And I think that it was almost like a cowardly way out of trying to have more subtle characterization.
Oh my gosh, see, that moment landed with me so hard. The only thing if I had a criticism of that moment, this monologue just goes on a little too long. But other than that, I really actually like that moment.
I was engaged with it because I think that she's an extraordinary actor. But what she's saying, which the word she's actually saying, feels like she's reading the first page of the script where they have the cast of characters and they kind of briefly describe them. That's how clinical it feels to me.
Oh, it didn't feel that way at all. I felt like it was so authentic. And you would get that reference. Yeah, you would get that reference if you see the movie.
The one thing I can say about Malcolm and Marie, if I call it a failure of ambition, the ambition is still there. Like, there is a lot of talent here in Sam Levinson. I think even in his writing ability, which I'm, poking a lot of holes in right now, but it shows how much he's thinking about what he's writing and the kind of stories he wants to tell. And maybe he's not really landing it that well yet, but there's a lot of things to like here.
Yeah, sometimes I saw the dialogue that Malcolm and Marie were having as like possible arguments that he's having in his own head with himself. Like Malcolm is a representation of his critical thinking of film criticism. And then Marie is kind of like this representation of his kind of like more understanding side of film criticism. Because there is kind of like a debate there that happens between them. And she obviously doesn't think it's as important as, or not as big a deal as Malcolm's character is taking it.
I'm not saying this film should be a comedy, but when it leans into comedy, it's actually really funny. It's maybe only 3 or 4 times that it happens, but it's quite funny when it does it. I wish it did it a little more.
It landed so well for me. Those particular moments worked so well. But I kind of want to go back to when you were talking about how this was kind of like a product of being in the pandemic. Yeah. Because one of the things I absolutely loved about this movie was how it was shot and how they did so much with so little. And I think the location they picked was absolutely perfect because it just led to so many dynamic shots. And putting it in black and white, I think, was an excellent decision as well.
Agreed. I think that this is maybe a little bit of an unfair comparison, but when you think of like two people trapped in a room movies, it's a lot of really great movies. It's the Before series. It's a great film called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which you probably haven't seen, based on the Edward Albee play. Amazing movie from the 60s that's about two couples that are trapped in a room with each other all night long. That the writing is just extraordinary. So, I don't know. I think a film like this, the writing really needs to be top-notch for everything to land so well.
So one thing about the writing that I really, really liked is kind of how this argument builds, and these little details are kind of revealed as the film progresses, and it gets so much more complex. in terms of the arguments that they're having.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that that's probably the strongest part of the writing. There are, say, like there's a character of Taylor that's mentioned. There's only these two people in the whole movie, but they talk about this character Taylor.
Talk about Taylor a lot.
Yeah, they talk about Taylor in one way in the beginning, and then it kind of morphs into something else. It gets this new dimension as the film goes on.
Yeah, and on the side note, this is totally random, but I love the references to the Lego Movie.
I love the reference to Elaine May. I'm like, oh, nobody talks about Elaine May in movies. I love Elaine May. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I was just pointing that out. And I love how it just kept coming up in different ways, too. Even that conversation about the Lego Movie, it popped up randomly in different arguments and conversations. But I loved how even that had some evolution to it. It's just... All right, so I think we've gone through this movie enough. What do you think in terms of grades?
I think I'm going to give this movie a B-.
Okay.
And I think that everything I said is true. And there are things that I just really adore about it. And there's things about it that really annoy me. It's like the epitome of a mixed bag. I love the performances. I really hope both of them get nominated for Oscars. I think that they deserve it. But there's just, I think, a lot of insecurity in the writing that's just too often on display for me. I actually liked the movie a little bit better talking to you. I'm at the same grade, strangely enough, and I haven't read a lot of reviews, but I saw the Metacritic score, and I think that critics are being too hard on this movie and not seeing all of the things that are good about it, just based off that score. Anyhow, that's where I'm at.
Okay, well, I'm going to buck this trend of critics and you alike, and I give this film an A-. And I don't know if I'll come to regret
That's
that. High. I don't know if I'll come to regret that.
I didn't realize you liked it that much.
I really
cool.
did. I really enjoyed this movie.
The thing is, I completely understand why you liked it so much. I really do.
These actors were just so phenomenal. I think whatever flaws the screenplay had, these actors just elevated it to such a level that I just can't overlook it. I was just enthralled with this film. I'm excited to watch it again at some point, actually. The scenes would move from the next to the next, and there would be some kind of argument and some kind of makeup, and I was just like, but there were so many things in each one, like all these nuances, and I think there's just a lot there to see. Oscars abound. I wouldn't say technically for writing, but I think for the acting. Like I would love,
maybe just the actors.
Yeah, I would love in terms of acting, particularly with this movie, I just want to throw out the Oscars.
And yeah, a lot of people are focusing on Zendaya, and she's amazing. I don't want John David Washington to be lost, but I really think they're equally amazing. Like, I think they're so good. So that's a review of Malcolm and Marie, which is now streaming on Netflix. Feel free to like this video if you liked it, and we'll see you in the next one.